Stay away from her!" The roar sliced through the grand hall like a blade, making the stained glass windows vibrate. Victor stalked across the ballroom with predatory strides, his golden eyes blazing with murderous fury. Counselor Pemberton froze, his hand still outstretched toward Anna's bare arm. The Alpha King positioned himself behind the young woman like a lethal shadow, encircling her waist with a possessiveness that left no doubt for anyone present. But how had Anna gone from an invisible servant to the center of a territorial war among werewolves? And why did her heart hammer erratically when she felt the heat of Victor's body against her back? Drop a like if you're reading this from bed too, and tell us where you're tuning in from. This story promises twists that will blow your mind. 3 years before that explosive night, Anna had arrived at Black Rock Estate with only a worn-out backpack and an iron will. At 19, she carried the burden of keeping her younger brother, Thomas, alive. Thomas, at 12 years old, had begun to show the first signs of the mysterious feral plague ravaging the borderland werewolves. The scent of wolfsbane and fear that always permeated the Black Rock Estate kitchens no longer bothered her. She had grown accustomed to the constant terror that hung over all the servants. While the other women trembled and wept during the royal inspections, Anna kept her hands steady, slicing valerian roots, her fingernails stained with soil and bitter herbs. She had learned early that invisibility was survival. Every morning before dawn, she rubbed a special paste of her own creation, a blend of oak moss, sage ash, and neutralizing plant oils, into every inch of her skin. The formula was her greatest protection, completely masking the sweet floral scent that naturally emanated from an omega. In a society that treated women like her as either breeding trophies or political tools, Anna had found safety in the shadows. No one looked twice at the slender servant with pulled-back brown hair, wearing loose clothes that concealed her natural curves, and a stooped posture that suggested total submission. What Anna couldn't hide was her intellect. During the long winter nights, when work in the kitchens dwindled, she slipped through the Black Rock Estate corridors, studying the ancient runes that adorned the walls. Her education had been abruptly cut short when her family disappeared, but she continued learning on her own, deciphering dead languages and absorbing knowledge of herbology, and healing that went far beyond what any commoner should know. It was this knowledge that saved her the first time she crossed paths with Alpha King Victor. It was an especially cold March morning when one of the royal counselors arrived in the Black Rock Estate kitchens with alarming news. The king had spent the entire night awake, battling another surge from the protective arcane barrier that guarded the Valorian territory. His life force was rapidly depleting, and the court healers were at a loss. Anna overheard the conversation while organizing spices and felt something twist in her chest, an almost physical compulsion to help. That night, she prepared a mixture of Siberian ginseng, golden licorice root, and waning moonflower petals, discreetly leaving the tonic next to the king's favorite bottle of wine. Victor drank the wine, unsuspecting, and woke the next morning feeling stronger than he had in months. He credited the improvement to his own resilience, never imagining that an anonymous servant was silently tending to his health. This ritual continued for weeks. Anna watched from a distance as Victor gradually regained his vitality, his shoulders straightening, his posture once again radiating the natural power of an alpha at the peak of his strength. She felt a strange, deep satisfaction watching him improve, as if she were fulfilling a greater purpose. It was April when everything changed. The feral plague had spread to 3 new outlying northern communities, and the council was pressing Victor with increasing urgency. During a particularly tense meeting, Chief Advisor Blackwood slammed his fist on the massive mahogany table. "Your Majesty, we have no more time," his voice echoed through the room. "The clans are beginning to question your leadership. They say a king without a mate is a king without a future. If you do not present a bride within the next few weeks, you risk facing open rebellion." Victor ran a hand through his dark hair, feeling the familiar weight of the crown he had never asked to wear. At 28, he had ascended the throne after the violent death of his father, killed in an ambush orchestrated by the northern claimants. For 7 years he had governed with an iron fist, focused solely on protecting his people and keeping the borders secure. Romance had never been a priority. In fact, he had convinced himself he was incapable of love. His heart had hardened to stone after seeing his father's mangled body being brought back to the Black Rock estate on a rainy autumn night. 6 months, Victor said finally, his voice low and controlled. Give me 6 months with a false mate. Enough time to stabilize the political situation and find another solution for the plague. And where exactly do you intend to find a woman willing to pretend to be your destined mate? Blackwood asked skeptically. All right, Omegaverse fans, brace yourselves for the next chapter of raw power and undeniable attraction. King Victor is under immense pressure, and his solution? Well, it's about to get real interesting. Let's see how this unfolds. Victor remained silent for a long moment, looking out the window at the Black Rock estate gardens, where the servants worked among the flowers. An idea began to form in his mind. Dangerous, unconventional, yet possibly brilliant. Among the servants, he said. Someone already accustomed to obeying orders and keeping secrets. Someone invisible enough not to arouse suspicion, yet presentable enough to convince the court. It was thus that, the following morning, Victor personally descended to the Black Rock estate kitchens to make his selection. The aroma of fresh bread and cooking herbs filled the air as he entered the workspace. All the women present immediately ceased their activities and lowered their heads in reverence. But Victor could feel the furtive glances, the palpable nervousness his presence caused. He walked slowly among the countertops, observing each face, each posture. Most of the servants visibly trembled under his scrutiny. Some attempted to stand out, subtly arching their backs, or letting strands of hair fall from their ponytails. Others seemed to wish they could disappear into themselves. And then he stopped behind Anna. She had not once lifted her eyes since he entered. Her hands continued to cut roots with precise, steady movements, as if the Alpha King's presence was irrelevant. There was no tremor in her fingers, no haste in her actions. It was a calm that bordered on indifference, exactly what he sought. Victor leaned slightly and inhaled. The scent emanating from her was strange for a young woman. Damp earth, bitter herbs, oak moss. Completely neutral, almost masculine. Perfect for his purposes. You, he said, his grave voice cutting through the silence. What is your name? Anna finally lifted her eyes, revealing irises gray as storm water. Anna Whitmore, Your Majesty. Come with me. It was not a request. The office in the East Tower was an intimidating environment, even under normal circumstances. The stone walls were covered with ancient tapestries and ancient runes that seemed to observe any visitor with invisible eyes. A fireplace crackled on one wall, but the fire seemed incapable of fully warming the room. Victor positioned himself behind his desk, a massive piece of black oak that had belonged to 5 generations of Alpha Kings before him. Anna remained standing, her hands clasped in front of her body, waiting. I need a wife, Victor said bluntly. Not a real wife, an actress, someone who can pretend to be my destined mate for exactly 6 months. Anna blinked slowly, processing the words. May I ask why, Your Majesty? The question surprised him. Most people simply accepted his orders without question. Political pressure. The council believes an unmarried Alpha King is an easy target for coups. They might be right. And what would I gain from this? Now she had definitely captured his attention. Victor leaned forward, studying her face with new interest. What do you want? Anna hesitated for only a moment before speaking. Medical resources, access to the royal healers, and a small property in the countryside when this is all over. For what? I have a sick brother. It was only a partial lie. Thomas was sick, yes, but Anna knew the royal healers wouldn't possess enough knowledge to truly aid him. She needed access to the Black Rock Estate's medical library to the ancient texts on the feral plague that were safeguarded in the royal archives, and she needed time to develop a cure herself. Victor watched her face for a long moment. There were no tears, no dramatic pleas, only calm, practical determination. Exactly the kind of person he could respect. 6 months, he stated. You will move into the quarters adjacent to mine. You will attend social events by my side. You will feign affection when necessary. And you will maintain absolute secrecy regarding the nature of our arrangement. What if I fall for you? Anna asked, surprising both of them with her candor. Victor scoffed, a dry, humorless sound. That won't happen. I'll make sure of it. How profoundly wrong he was. The initial days in the royal quarters were a challenging adjustment for Anna. The chamber designated for her was larger than the entire home she had grown up in. The bed alone could comfortably accommodate 4 individuals, and the windows offered a panoramic vista of the Blackrock estate gardens she had only ever seen from afar. But what most struck her was the sheer proximity to Victor. Their quarters were connected by a shared sitting room, and she could hear him moving about in his chamber late at night, his heavy footsteps echoing across the marble floor when restlessness consumed him. For the first few weeks, they maintained a polite yet frigid distance. Victor treated her as an efficient subordinate, respectful, but utterly impersonal. Anna mirrored his demeanor, fulfilling her obligations with the precision of a seasoned actress. During social engagements, she smiled when appropriate, accepted accolades with modest grace, and allowed Victor to guide her across the dance floor with a staged intimacy that thoroughly deceived the court. She had diligently studied the high society etiquette guides during her sleepless nights, memorizing every protocol rule until it became second nature. But when they were alone, the tension between them was nearly palpable. Victor seemed resolute in maintaining an absolute emotional distance, speaking to her only when necessary and avoiding any touch not strictly mandated for their public performance. Anna, in turn, found herself watching him more than she should have. She noticed how he rubbed his temples when stressed, how his jaw clenched when receiving bad news about the feral plague, how his golden eyes darkened when he was contemplating something particularly difficult. And she continued to secretly care for him. The tonics in his wine became more complex, adapted to the specific needs she perceived. When he spent sleepless nights dealing with political crises, she added calming herbs. When the Valorian territory's protective arcane barrier demanded more energy from him, she included natural stimulants that boosted his vitality without side effects. Victor never suspected. He simply credited his improved health to the reduced stress of having resolved the mate issue. The first crack in his cold facade appeared during the 2nd month, on a particularly difficult night. Anna woke to the sound of glass shattering from the common room. She slipped on a robe and stepped out of her room to find Victor standing amidst the shards of a crystal glass, a crumpled letter in his hand. 3 more outlying communities, he said without looking at her, his voice hoarse with contained rage. The feral plague reached 3 more outlying communities yesterday. 17 deaths in the last week alone. Anna approached carefully, avoiding the glass shards scattered across the floor. Can I help? Victor finally raised his eyes to hers, and Anna saw something she hadn't expected. Pure, desperate vulnerability. Unless you have a magic cure stashed away somewhere, no. I don't have a cure, Anna admitted, but I have ears, and sometimes talking helps. For a moment, Victor seemed about to dismiss her with a sharp retort, but then his shoulders slumped slightly, and he sank into one of the armchairs near the fireplace. My father, he began slowly, always said that being Alpha King means carrying the weight of every lost life. Every death is a personal failure. Every destroyed family is evidence that you weren't strong enough, clever enough, fast enough. Anna sat in the opposite armchair, maintaining a respectful but attentive distance. Your father sounds like he was a wise man. My father is dead, Victor said bitterly. Dead because he trusted the wrong people. And now I'm making the same mistakes, letting my people die while I pretend to have a solution." "You're not pretending to have a solution," Anna said softly. "You're buying time to find one. It's different." Victor looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. How does a kitchen servant become so perceptive? Anna felt her heart quicken. She was dangerously close to revealing more about herself than was safe. Life teaches many lessons to those willing to learn. They stood in silence for several minutes, the crackle of the fire, the only sound between them. Finally, Victor rose and began to pick up the shards of glass with his bare hands. "Let me do that," Anna said, rising as well. "It's not your job. Neither is it yours." Victor paused and looked at her, a small smile touching the corner of his mouth for the first time since she had known him. "Touché." They cleaned the shards together, working in silent synchronicity. As Anna picked up a particularly sharp piece, she cut her finger lightly, a small bead of blood immediately welling up. Victor reacted with a speed that surprised her, taking her hand and examining the cut. His touch was gentle, completely unlike the brutality she might have expected from a warrior. "It's just a scratch," she said, but did not pull her hand away. "Even so," Victor murmured, and to both their surprise, he brought her finger to his mouth, licking the blood away with his tongue. The moment was electric. Anna felt a shiver ripple through her entire body, and Victor froze as he realized what he had done. They stared at each other for a moment that seemed to stretch into forever, both perfectly aware that something fundamental had shifted between them. Victor released her hand as if it burned him. That shouldn't have happened. "But it did," Anna said softly. "It can't happen again." But Anna could see in his eyes that he wanted it to happen again as much as she did. From that night on, the dynamic between them subtly shifted. Victor still maintained his professional distance during the day, but sometimes Anna caught him looking at her with an intensity that made her stomach churn. And during public appearances, their staged touches began to linger a few seconds longer than necessary. The turning point arrived during an official trip to the borders in the 3rd month of their agreement. The royal retinue was visiting the outlying community of Thornwick, one of the areas most afflicted by the feral plague. Victor wanted to personally witness the damage and assess the region's defenses. Anna accompanied him, playing the role of the concerned and supportive companion. What they found was devastating. Abandoned houses lined the main streets, their gardens overrun with weeds. The few residents who remained looked like ghosts of themselves, pale faces and sunken eyes, revealing the constant fear they lived in. It was during the meeting with the local council that Anna noticed something strange. The man who introduced himself as the village healer had a peculiar scent, not of medicinal herbs as expected, but of something chemical and artificial she couldn't identify. When he described the plague's symptoms, several details did not align with what Anna had read in the medical texts. He mentioned high fever as an initial symptom, but the ancient records spoke of abnormally low body temperature. He said the disease primarily affected the elderly, but Anna knew that historically, the plague had been more lethal for young werewolves of reproductive age. She said nothing during the meeting, but her mind was working furiously, connecting points that began to form a disturbing pattern. The ambush happened as they were returning to the Black Rock estate. A group of masked men attacked the Alpha King's retinue in a narrow pass between two cliffs. The guards' screams echoed through the mountains as swords clashed under the dim twilight. Victor fought like the warrior he was, his sword dancing in deadly arcs as he protected Anna and tried to organize the defense. But they were outnumbered and in a poor tactical position. "The cave!" Victor roared over the din of battle, pointing to an opening in the rock about 50 yards away. "Run!" Anna hesitated for only a second before obeying. She ran as she had never run before, her lungs burning as she scrambled up the slick rocks towards the cave. Behind her, she could hear Victor fighting to clear a path, some of the surviving guards forming a desperate rear guard. They reached the cave just as a snowstorm began to fall, the flakes rapidly growing from light to heavy. Victor had a deep gash on his left arm, and blood streamed between his fingers as he pressed the wound. "Let me see that," Anna said, approaching him. "It's nothing serious," Victor murmured, but she could see from the paleness of his skin that he was losing more blood than he wanted to admit. The cave was small but deep, offering protection from both the attackers and the howling storm outside. Anna tore a strip from her own skirt and began to clean Victor's wound in the faint light filtering through the cave's opening. "Who were they?" she asked as she worked. "Rebels, probably," Victor said through gritted teeth as she applied pressure to the wound. "Or mercenaries hired by someone who wants me dead." "The list must be long," Victor laughed humorlessly. "Longer than I'd like." Anna finished cleaning the wound and began to fashion an improvised bandage. But the gash was deeper than she had initially thought, and the bleeding wasn't stopping. If he lost much more blood, he could go into shock. It was then that she made a decision that would change everything between them. Without a word, Anna took the small knife Victor carried on his belt and made a shallow cut on her own palm. Blood immediately welled up, bright red against her pale skin. "What are you doing?" Victor asked, alarmed. Anna didn't answer. Instead, she pressed her injured hand against his wound, mixing her blood with his. The effect was instant and impossible to ignore. Victor's torn flesh began to heal at a supernatural speed. The bleeding stopped completely, and his skin closed as if a week of recovery had happened in seconds. Victor pushed her away, his golden eyes blazing with a mixture of shock and something that might have been fear. What the hell was that? Anna recoiled, suddenly aware of the magnitude of what she had revealed. I can explain." "You have healing blood," Victor said, his voice low and dangerous. "True Omega lineage, extinct for 3 generations." There was no point in denying it. "Yes." "And why did you hide this from me?" "For the same reason I hide that I'm an Omega," Anna said, finding her voice. "Because you know the history. You know what happened to the last family with that lineage." Victor knew. They had been hunted to extinction for their very rarity, turned into political tools, until none were left. The irony was not lost on him. He had chosen Anna precisely because she seemed common, without political value, and he discovered she was possibly the most valuable woman in the entire Valorian territory. "Why did you save me?" he asked. Anna looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Because you're worth saving." The sexual tension that had been carefully suppressed for months finally exploded. Victor approached her with the predatory grace of a werewolf, his eyes never leaving hers. "Anna," he said, his voice hoarse. "Yes. If I kiss you now, I won't be able to pretend this is just business." Anna's heart hammered. "Who said I'm pretending?" Victor kissed her like a man who had been dying of thirst and finally found water. It was desperate, urgent, filled with months of suppressed tension. Anna responded with equal intensity, her hands tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. Victor rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if he were fighting an internal war. "This complicates everything," he murmured. "I know." The agreement was for 6 months, no emotional complications. "I know that too. And yet, Anna agreed. They spent the night in the cave, pressed against each other for warmth as the storm raged outside. They didn't make love. Both knew it would cross a line from which there would be no return. But they held each other, and for the first time since they'd met, Victor completely dropped his guard. He spoke of the relentless pressure of leading, of the gnawing fear of failing as his father had. Anna spoke of growing up inherently different, of the fierce burden of protecting Thomas when she was barely more than a child herself. They laid bare stories, fears and dreams neither had ever entrusted to another soul. When the rescue guards discovered them the following morning, Something fundamentally irrevocable had shifted between them. They would still maintain their public pretense, but now an underlying truth simmered, rendering the performance almost superfluous. Back at Black Rock Estate, Victor's protectiveness over Anna intensified, though he meticulously masked it as professional vigilance. He mandated personal guards for her, insisted all her food be sampled, and forbade her from venturing into certain areas of the estate after dusk. Anna, in turn, grew bolder in her clandestine ministrations towards him. She began to leave not only vital tonics, but also small, intimate notes, excerpts from ancient texts she believed he would appreciate, astute observations on military strategies she'd devoured, profound thoughts on the very nature of leadership. Victor carefully safeguarded every single note. The fourth month ushered in preparations for the summer solstice gala, the Valorian territory's most pivotal social event of the year. It was a centuries-old tradition that congregated all the alphas of the Valorian pack and dignitaries from neighboring territories. For Victor and Anna, it would be the ultimate crucible for their performance as a royal couple. It was during this period that Anna began to discern peculiar alterations within herself. The masking herbs she religiously consumed daily began to wane in efficacy. Her skin developed a subtle, pearlescent luminosity she had never possessed before. Her curves, meticulously concealed beneath loose garments, began to grow more pronounced. Most alarmingly of all, her natural omega scent started to bleed through the masking. Instead of the neutral aroma of earth and bitter herbs, tantalizing hints of lavender and summer rain began to emerge, particularly when Victor was in close proximity. Anna knew precisely what was unfolding, even as she desperately tried to deny it. The true mate bond, that primal, mystical connection between fated alphas and omegas, was irrevocably beginning to forge. The constant, charged proximity to Victor, combined with the burgeoning attraction between them, was awakening her true omega nature. She aggressively doubled the quantity of masking herbs, applying them to the point of irritating her delicate skin with the excessive use. But it was a losing battle against the relentless march of biology. Victor, caught up in gala preparations and urgent political matters, didn't immediately notice the subtle shifts. But his own alpha nature was responding in ways he couldn't quite comprehend. He found himself growing more possessive of Anna, more alert to any man who ventured too close to her during social events. His temper, usually an unyielding wall, began to show cracks when other counselors made comments about his companion's blossoming beauty. The morning of the summer solstice gala dawned clear and crisp. Anna spent hours preparing, applying extra layers of masking herbs and lacing herself into a tight corset to minimize her burgeoning curves. The maid who came to assist her with her gown remarked on how radiant her skin had been lately, a comment that made Anna's stomach clench with a familiar surge of anxiety. The gown chosen for her was a stunning piece in deep royal blue, the color of the Valorian pack's ruling lineage. The fabric was pure silk, with silver thread embroidery that caught the light in an almost hypnotic shimmer. The cut was elegant yet modest, befitting a future Alpha Luna. When Anna descended the grand staircase into the main hall, the effect was devastating. Conversations died mid-sentence. Wine glasses froze in mid-air, and every eye swiveled to her. The scent masking had only worked partially. Faint traces of lavender and rain still wafted around her like an invisible yet potent aura. To Anna, who still saw herself as the invisible servant of 3 years past, the attention was both disconcerting and terrifying. She offered polite smiles and greetings to the counselors who approached, but she didn't fully grasp the primal weight of the gazes fixed upon her. To the court, especially the alphas present, she was a vision of fertility and latent power. Her awakened omega aura, even partially masked, called out primitively to their instincts of procreation and protection. It was a biological imperative she couldn't control, and they couldn't ignore. Victor stood across the hall when she appeared, deep in conversation with envoys from neighboring territories. When he saw her, his discussion died mid-sentence. She was absolutely breathtaking, but it was the scent that hit him like a physical blow. Even from this distance, He could detect nuances of lavender and rain that hadn't been there the week before. His inner wolf rumbled a low growl, a sound he quickly suppressed before anyone could overhear. It was then that Counselor Pemberton moved towards Anna. Pemberton was known throughout the court for his cruelty and arrogance. An alpha of some 40 years with a reputation for treating females as property. He had been watching Anna since she first appeared in court beside Victor. Tonight, with her scent partially unmasked, he decided it was time to test the boundaries. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing elaborately. "May I say you look absolutely radiant tonight. There's something different about you, a sweetness I hadn't noticed before." Anna forced a polite smile, all her instincts screaming danger. "Counselor Pemberton, thank you very much for the compliment. The fragrance you're wearing is intoxicating," he continued, taking a step closer than was appropriate. "Almost natural, like flowers after rain." Across the ballroom, Victor felt every muscle in his body tense. He could see Pemberton getting too close to Anna. He could practically feel her discomfort even from a distance. But before he could move, Counselor Morrison appeared beside Pemberton. "Your Majesty," Morrison said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "it would be an honor if you would permit me a dance. I'm sure the Alpha King wouldn't mind sharing for one song." Anna felt panic begin to form in her chest. She had trained to handle courtly politics, but this felt different, more predatory. Certainly, if the Alpha King approves." It was then that the young Counselor Harrison joined the group, his eyes gleaming with an interest that made Anna want to hide. "Your Majesty," Harrison said, completely ignoring the other men, "allow me to say you look absolutely stunning. That blue enhances your eyes magnificently. I must ask where you acquired such an enchanting fragrance. My sister would be fascinated to know." Anna was being surrounded, and she knew it. 3 powerful alphas, all clearly drawn to her awakened Omega aura, all competing for her attention in ways that completely disrespected her supposed bond with the king. She tried to maintain her composure, politely answering questions and trying to create physical distance without causing a scene. But when Pemberton reached out to examine the embroidery on her sleeve, his fingers deliberately brushing the bare skin of her arm, something inside Victor completely snapped. The roar that erupted from his throat was primitive and terrifying. It wasn't just a sound of anger. It was a declaration of territorial war that made the stained glass windows of the ballroom rattle in their frames. "Stay away from her!" The command was imbued with all the alpha power Victor possessed. The force of the order made every lower-ranking werewolf in the ballroom instinctively lower their heads, including the 3 men who surrounded Anna. It was a display of power that shattered all rules of social etiquette, but Victor was beyond caring about etiquette. He stormed across the ballroom like a force of nature, nobles parting from his path like waves before a ship. His golden eyes glowed with a murderous light that promised deadly violence to anyone who dared challenge him. When he reached Anna, he positioned himself behind her like a protective shadow, encircling her waist with one arm in a possessive gesture that left no doubt for anyone present. He pulled her against his chest, his warmth completely enveloping her. "She," Victor growled to the gathered court, his voice low but carrying perfectly through the silent hall, "is mine. Anyone who touches her again will answer directly to me." Anna felt her heart race, not from fear, but from something far more dangerous. The heat of Victor's body against her back, his masculine scent completely surrounding her, the way he protected her, as if she were the most precious treasure in the world. All of it awakened something deep and primitive within her. This was the moment they both knew the pretense was over. Victor wasn't acting. The possessiveness in his voice, the tremor of pure rage in his muscles, the way he marked her with his scent in front of the entire court. This was real. More real than anything he had ever felt before. For Anna, who had spent her entire life being invisible and disposable, to be defended with such ferocity was revelatory. For the first time, someone had looked at her and decided she was worth fighting for. but the consequences of this public display were immediate and devastating. Chief Advisor Blackwood, who had been observing the entire interaction with growing interest, realized the king was emotionally compromised. This was not part of the plan. A passionate king was an unpredictable king, a king who could make decisions based on emotion instead of political logic. In the 2 weeks following the gala, Blackwood set in motion an investigation into Anna's true identity. What he discovered was explosive. Anna Whitmore did not exist in official records because it wasn't her real name. Her true name was Anna Thornfield, daughter of Marcus Thornfield, the leader of the Northern Claimants, who had orchestrated the ambush that killed Victor's father 7 years prior. The revelation was made publicly during a council session, with half the court present as witnesses. Blackwood presented documents proving Anna's lineage, including her original birth certificate and witnesses who confirmed her identity. "Your Majesty," Blackwood said with false solemnity, "it appears your mate is in fact the daughter of the man who murdered your father. The question we must ask is, was this coincidence or planning?" Victor stood petrified, feeling as though the ground had vanished beneath his feet. He looked at Anna, who was pale as death, but not denying the accusations. "Is it true?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. Anna lifted her chin, meeting his eyes with a courage she didn't know she possessed. "Yes, Marcus Thornfield was my father." The silence in the hall was absolute. Victor felt as if a blade had been plunged into his heart and twisted. The woman he was falling for, the woman who had healed his wounds and held his secrets, was the daughter of his mortal enemy. "You knew," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes. And you didn't tell me." "No. Why?" Anna glanced around the hall, filled with hostile, curious faces before she answered. "Because the sins of the father are not automatically the sins of the daughter. Because I didn't choose my lineage, just as you didn't choose yours. And because," her voice trembled slightly, "because I hoped that by the time you found out, you would know me well enough to understand who I truly am." But Victor was beyond hearing reason. The betrayal burned in his chest like acid. "Take her to the dungeons," he ordered the guards, not looking at her. "Victor," Anna began. "It's your Majesty to you," he cut in coldly. "And you lost the right to use my name the moment you decided to lie to me." Anna was led away without resistance, her dignity intact even as the chains were placed on her wrists. Victor watched her go, a part of him dying with every step she took. The 5th month was of absolute darkness for them both. Anna was placed in a cell in the Blackrock Estate's deepest dungeons, a damp, cold environment that smelled of mold and despair. But even there, her mind kept working. She had access to little information, but the few conversations she managed to overhear from the guards revealed a disturbing pattern. The feral plague was spreading in a very specific way. It always started near water sources, always affected the younger, stronger werewolves first, and always seemed to stop abruptly at the borders of certain estates belonging to council members. Anna requested paper and ink, claiming she wanted to write a full confession. What she actually did was map the disease patterns based on everything she had observed and heard. What emerged was terrifying. The plague was not a natural disease. It was deliberate and systematic poisoning. Someone was introducing something into the water that specifically affected young werewolves of reproductive age, and that someone had access to considerable resources and detailed knowledge of the Valorian territory's water systems. The realization hit her like lightning. The council was behind the plague. They were killing their own people to weaken Victor and force political changes. The marriage they had pressured him into was never about stability. It was about creating a crisis that would justify a coup. But she was trapped in the dungeons, with no way to communicate this information to Victor. And even if she could, why would he believe the daughter of his enemy? It was then that one of the guards, a young man named Thomas, whom she had cured of a fever months earlier, approached her cell late that night. "Majesty," he whispered. "I shouldn't be doing this, but you saved my life. If there's anything you need to tell the king, I can try to pass on the message." Anna looked at the young man, seeing in him the same age her brother would be now if he were still alive. "Thomas," she said softly, "I need you to help me escape." "I cannot do that, Majesty. It would be treason." "What if I told you I have information that could save hundreds of lives? That the feral plague isn't natural, and I know how to stop it?" Thomas hesitated, conflict clear on his young features. "Do you have family, Thomas?" Anna asked. "Siblings? Parents?" "I have a younger sister. She lives near Millbrook." "Millbrook will be next," Anna said with absolute certainty. "The feral plague will reach there within 2 weeks, and your sister will be among the first victims unless I stop this." The young guard looked at her for a long moment, before slowly taking the keys from his belt. Anna escaped the prison in the early hours of the morning, taking advantage of the changing of the guards. But instead of fleeing Black Rock Estate, she ran in the opposite direction, towards the source of the Silver Stream River, the water source that fed the entire Valorian territory. She knew she didn't have much time before her escape was discovered. She had perhaps 2 hours before Victor sent all the guards after her. 2 hours to find the source of the poisoning and neutralize it. What she found at the spring was worse than she had imagined. An elaborate piping system had been installed to introduce a chemical substance directly into the water source. The substance was a diabolical creation, a poison that slowly accumulated in the system, specifically affecting werewolves in their most productive age. Anna worked frantically to dismantle the system, using her knowledge of herbalism to create an antidote that could be introduced directly into the water. But she knew she would need a magical catalyst to purify the entire system at once. It was then she realized the only possible solution. In the 6th and final month, Victor was leading a desperate defense against what he believed to be a rebellion orchestrated by his father's enemies. In truth, they were mercenaries paid by the council itself to create enough chaos to justify his removal from power. Victor was weakened by the gradual poisoning he had been ingesting for months through the water. His strength was failing him at the moment he needed it most. It was at the moonlit altar, the sacred site where kings had been crowned for 1,000 years, that everything came to a head. Victor was kneeling, wounded and exhausted, surrounded by enemies who were not who he thought they were. That was when Anna appeared. She didn't arrive as a damsel in distress, but as a warrior healer. She had poured the antidote into the spring, but to fully activate it and purify the entire Valorian territory's water network, she needed raw, magical power. "The contract," she screamed at Victor over the din of battle. "Read Clause 7. Even amidst the chaos, Victor remembered the tiny print at the end of the document they had both signed months ago. A protection clause that transferred any lethal damage aimed at her directly to him. He had included that clause knowing exactly what it meant. If Anna were in mortal peril, he would die in her stead. It had been his way of ensuring her survival if his plans crumbled. Now Anna knew the truth. Victor had planned from the outset to sacrifice his life for her if necessary. He hadn't chosen her as a disposable actress. He had chosen her as someone worth dying to protect. The realization shattered every barrier Anna had erected around her heart. The love she had tried to deny erupted to the surface, along with her true Omega nature. She fully accepted the mate bond there, in the most sacred place in the Valorian territory, with the strength of her will and emotion fueling the ancient magic of the location. The union of an Alpha King and his true Omega at the moonlit altar created a shockwave of pure power that spread across the entire Valorian territory. The magic not only activated the antidote in the water, purifying it instantly, but also created an aura of command so potent that the mercenaries were paralyzed where they stood. Victor felt strength surge back into his body like a flood. The weakness wrought by the poisoning was swept away by the purifying magic. But more important than that, he felt the bond solidify. A connection with Anna that was deeper than anything he had ever imagined possible. He rose, no longer the solitary, wounded king, but half of something greater and more powerful. Anna stood beside him, no longer concealing her true nature, radiating an authority that rivaled his own. Together, they confronted the true traitors. The combined might of their command auras unveiled the truth in a way that could not be denied or twisted. Blackwood and the other conspirators fell to their knees, their lies laid bare before the power of the true bond. Victor gazed at Anna, seeing her clearly for the first time, not as the servant she had pretended to be, not as the enemy's daughter she had been born to be, but as his true mate, the other half of his soul. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice fractured by emotion, "for not believing you, for letting fear and anger blind me to the truth." Anna placed her hand on his face, her fingers tracing the lines of tension that had formed during the months of their separation. "We both made mistakes. I should have trusted you with the truth from the beginning. Can you forgive me? Only if you can forgive me." Victor kissed her right there, before the entire gathered court, before the defeated enemies, before the ancient gods witnessing at the moonlit altar. It was a kiss that sealed not only their mutual forgiveness, but their commitment to a future built on truth instead of lies. Redemption arrived with the spring. Victor did not forgive the past. His father's death was still a wound that would never fully heal. But he learned to separate Marcus Thornfield's sins from the extraordinary woman Anna had become despite her lineage. Anna, now queen, crowned not by contract or politics, but by right of bond and proven bravery, used her position to establish new laws. Omegas would no longer be treated as political property. Forced marriages were banned. Healers from all social classes received official recognition and protection. The final obstacle, public acceptance, was overcome when Anna publicly cured the last pockets of the feral plague in a ceremony broadcast throughout the Valorian territory via arcane communication crystals. Seeing their queen risk her own safety to save people she didn't even know completely won the people's hearts. They ruled side by side, her hand always in his during public audiences, a constant reminder of the night he had snarled at the entire world to stay away from her. That moment of primal possessiveness had been the first real step in a complex dance that saved not just a kingdom, but two lost souls who found in each other exactly what they had always needed. In the quiet nights, when the real work was done and they were finally alone, Anna sometimes asked Victor if he regretted breaking protocol at that night's gala. "Never," he always replied, pulling her closer. "It was the most honest thing I ever did. You are mine, Anna Thornfield. Not because a paper says so, not because politics demands it, but because I chose you. And I would choose you again, in any life, under any circumstance." And Anna, who had spent her entire life being invisible and disposable, finally understood what it meant to be truly seen, truly valued, truly loved. If you enjoyed this story of a secret Omega who found love with the Alpha King, who protected her with such ferocity he defied his entire court, subscribe for more epic romances with the Alpha King. Hit that notification bell to never miss a story about forbidden love, hidden identities, and the power of fated mates. Remember, sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the bravest lie and end with the most dangerous truth.